Before I moved to Powelton, I was living out in Swarthmore with my husband and my then 1-year-old son, Josh. Yeah, I learned about Powelton in a funny way because first we had moved to Westchester County because my husband had a job in the city. And then he took a job down in Philadelphia. And one of the people I had met at a friend's meeting up in Westchester County where we'd been living told me about her daughter, Julie, who lived in Swarthmore and loved it and so on and so on. And she said, "You must meet Julie." So when we came down to look around to see where we wanted to live, we met Julie. And a year later, Julie moved to Cathedral Village. And we visited her in there, and we liked Powelton, and I felt very disconnected from life out in Swarthmore. That is, I had a child. I didn't have a car because my husband was taking that, and so on. And so we just decided we would move into Powelton Village, and we liked how they described themselves then. Powelton, it was a very progressive community that wanted justice for all, and had great Quakerly values. And it was just a very interesting place. We moved there in 1965 after meeting someone on the street. We kind of were scanning the neighborhood, and we looked at a house, and then someone came down the street with a poodle. And he was looked about 20 years old. And I was just eager to know how everybody in Powelton liked being in Powelton. So I approached this young man. His name was Gunther Cartwright, and he told me it was a wonderful place to live. And he lived just up the street from the house we were buying, and he had this really nice dog, and he was a photographer and a student at the time. Well, I think about this a lot because I'm kind of trying to write some things down that just, I don't know, justify my presence there. But it was during the time that the whole women's movement was just getting really lively then. But most of the women did not have jobs. But several of them were involved in a struggle to get a school for Powelton Village. They had children. They were staying home with the children, so they devoted themselves to trying to get a school. And so there was a lot of activism around getting a school, and indeed they did get a school in Powelton. The other thing that was happening is that with so many women, they just all read Betty Friedan. We were all thinking, well, shoot, we could be doing something besides just raising children. So a lot of the women, well, I think that led to an uptick in divorce. But it also led to an uptick in a lot of women having jobs instead of just staying home with the children. There was an organization called Powelton Homeowners, and my husband and I got divorced not too long after we moved to Powelton, but I had the house. But I didn't feel that I could join it because I didn't own it. So I didn't join the Powelton Homeowners. And so that was kind of strange. I felt a little bit different. I didn't feel quite integrated into the neighborhood at that point. It was very nice when Powelton Village changed its name to the Civic Association, because that meant all kinds of people could join. A much better reflection of Powelton's population could be achieved once they changed their name. And they did at that time have plans. They were very ambitious. They told us that their plan and hope and expectation was to have 34th Street dead-ended, probably at Powelton Avenue. It was obviously not to happen. So there was always traffic on 34th Street that was, it put one off about living on 34th Street, but indeed, that's where the house we could afford was, and so we lived on 34th Street and met very many nice neighbors. And it was a very good place to live in terms of meeting people that one would enjoy knowing and having one's children play with the children of. I stayed in the house on 34th Street, and like many people there, I rented rooms to students because Drexel didn't have dormitories, and that was a experience in itself. I had one guy who was a member of the fraternity at the corner of 34th and Powelton, and he would go out at all hours wrapped in a towel and take a shower over there because there wasn't a shower upstairs in the room he was near the room he was renting from me. And then he'd come back wrapped in a towel, and sometimes the police would stop him and make sure he belonged where he was going. And I had one really nice guy who lived up there and was very willing to babysit if I had a class at night or something like that. I did start taking some courses at Temple, and often needed a babysitter. So I lived on I stayed in Powelton really, a long time. In fact, I only moved out in 2018. I stayed in the house on 34th Street, and I was very fortunate. First, when we were living there, I was just feeling desperate. I needed to do something. And I actually got a teaching job at Friends Central School. I had gotten a so-called Master of Arts in Teaching degree from Brown University after I graduated from college. And the reason for that was that was right after, was it Sputnik, the Russians sent up, and all the colleges in the country decided they had to have a Master of Arts in Teaching program because clearly the Russians were teaching their citizens more than what that people were learning here. It was a very odd idea, and they didn't really have the wherewithal to teach all these people. They gave fellowships to come to get an MAT, but I got on a piece of paper an MAT, so I got a job at Friends Central School, and would go out there, and they fortunately had classes for kindergartners, or actually nursery-aged kids. So along with my job, I got a scholarship for my son to go to the school. So I worked out there, and that was considered kind of strange by the people in the women who were working for the public school in Powelton. And they would sometimes reproach me with having my son in a private school. But I didn't know what the alternatives were. But then I got a fellowship from Temple and to work on a PhD. So I left my job at Friends Central, and the fellowship was enough to keep me, along with the rental money, was enough to keep me. So that made me a little bit out of sync with some of the people in the neighborhood. But on the other hand, there were other people women who were working, and there was a wonderful woman, and I'm now blanking on her name, Ruth Kudemeyer, and she ran a playgroup for children, and all our children could go and spend their mornings with her. She lived on 33rd Street, and she was a marvelous person because she could take care of the kids, and we could sometimes then also, when I got the job or the fellowship at Temple, it was wonderful. We had the double. Wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. I hope you can edit this. That was later. Later, when I got a job at Temple, by then I was over on 34 on Hamilton Street, married to Wesley. So I've gotten it all out of. Do you want me to? Anyway, a very wonderful thing happened when I was in a position that I needed somebody to take care of my son, whom I had with Wesley. And I thought I had engaged a babysitter who would be coming in every day. This is actually when I was teaching at Drexel. I got a PhD at Temple, and then I got a job at Drexel. And it was just an incredible blessing, but it was a Powelton kind of thing because most of our houses were twin houses, and some new people had just moved into the house next door, and it was an African-American woman with her 2 granddaughters who had moved in, and I was out on the porch, and she was on the porch on the other side of the railing, and she looked at the baby, and he said how he reminded her of a little kid she used to take care of. And I said, do you like taking care of babies? Oh, I love taking care of babies. And she became part of my family. She just was a wonderful, wonderful person, raising her two granddaughters whose mother had left them. And they were older, though. They were in school, way up in high school. And she just moved. She became a part of the family. She took care of Anthony, but he slept a lot. And she would busy herself by cleaning up the kitchen or doing something that she thought needed doing. She was just wonderful. And this was like a lot of people in Powellton. There were women, often black women, who took care of children or worked, cleaned house, and so on. And that was one of the many benefits of moving over to Hamilton Street. There was probably one black person on every block, but there were not that many black people living right in the neighborhood. But of course, we came together with Spring Garden, with Mantua, and there were often black people on the street. Eli Anderson, who wrote about a book about Powellton, living in Powellton, did live in Powellton. He lived on Hamilton Street, and he wrote about how people behaved on the street. He thought that we became very stiff and formal on the street if we saw a black person coming. I disagreed with him, actually, but it wasn't as relaxed and as integrated. I mean, now black people can move into Powellton Village, and probably people next door would say, "Oh, great, let's have dinner together." But that was not how it was back in this, what is the 1960s. It wasn't like that. But Eli talked about how white people always had a certain way of behaving when they met up with a black person, and they'd be very formal and very quick to move on, but very polite. But it just didn't, I was not uncomfortable with black people on the street, and there weren't very many of them. But the one way that I did get to know some of them was that I became a volunteer at the library up on 34th Street, and immediately became friendly with a woman from Mantua. And gradually there were just more black people within the neighborhood too. And I met Babs Bigham, who was just a wonderful friend. She's great. But there were some terrible things happened. A former student of Wesley's was murdered on Baring Street. And there were a couple of attempts. Larry Byond was, I'm not sure. Yes, I think he did actually get shot, but I'm not sure he did. But Andy Nemeth someone came to their door and shot him, but no one was killed in those incidents, but there were people who were at the door with guns. But there was not very many people, but of course it doesn't take very many people. So there was tension, and sometimes black kids would attack white kids on the street. I remember Josh riding his tricycle around the corner and coming back just terrified because some larger, older black kids had chased him. And once he was also robbed of pizza money. But that was all early days. I mean, there doesn't, my impression by the time I left was there was far less of that kind of incident. In fact, I think the black people have more to fear than the white people in the neighborhood now. I met people gradually, and I didn't, and mostly it was around the schools and the kids that played together. I met Betty Nemeth, for instance, and she had lived in one of the cooperative houses that the they weren't all Quakers, but a lot of the early inhabitants of Powellton had Quakerly objectives, which was, complete integration and just living together. And I also met Bob Lee and Laura Lee. They lived on Hamilton Street, and Laura, had moved to Powellton because Laura had actually had a job at Penn, a position at Penn. She taught there, and I'm not sure if she was the first black professor they hired, but very, very close. And every time the Penn newsletter came out, there'd be a picture of Laura Lee at a committee meeting. They were using her as a kind of, okay, see, we're integrated. This lady is black and she's on the committee. But she got a wonderful job up north, and I forget the name of the college, but they moved out they moved away from Powellton at some point. Bob worked in New Jersey anyway. But we all stayed friends, and their kids, well, Bob Lee lives here where I live now at Cathedral Village, and the kids all went to college and are very successful people, and they were members of Top of the Dunes. That's how I really got to know them. But that's all, I'm mixing up history here. That came later. It was funny when we bought the house on 34th Street. What we were told is, buy through Jerry By and sell through George Funderburg. And Jerry By might get a nice house, but it would be cheaper than George Funder. If you bought through George Funderburg, it would cost you more. He got higher prices for houses, and we didn't get to know George Funderburg really at all, although we got to know Maggie, his ex-wife, and she too lives here. And they had 3 daughters, and they were all members of, Maggie was actually in on the beginning of Top of the Dunes. She was one of the people who went off with Barry Freeman, another mover and shaker in the neighborhood. A lot of very idealistic people. And they went down to look for a house. Initially, they would rent a place every year, but they could never rent the same place twice, because as soon as the person who'd rented it to them one year found out that it had been racially mixed, they would not rent again. And we had not only African Americans, but we had a couple of Japanese families, and they were also not welcome in the eyes of the people at the beach, apparently. So they got a straw buyer who, with Barry Freeman, went to the shore, and there was it's never been absolutely confirmed, but the idea that what probably is true, was that it was an old Coast Guard barracks. And so they bought that and fixed it all up gradually over the years. I'm sure it was a little bit rougher than it is now. But the next year that they talked to the police down there, I think it was, and they said, they told them that some guys from the area had offered to do something like destroy the house, because they called it the Pearl Buck House, because we had Japanese and black people staying there with white people. And the police told them no, they should not do that. And ever since, I think the relationship with the town of Harvey Cedars has been quite smooth and easy. And it's been a way of a lot of people getting to know each other, and we all are still members. Saber Cameron, Bob Lee, and I all living here. And we run it cooperatively so that it adheres to a lot of Quakerly principles, actually. And just a couple of weeks ago, they had I did not go. I feel that I'm a little old now to maintain the house, but they went down there and they painted the whole front of it a very beautiful shade of blue. I mean, this is 2.5-story house, and it got painted. And that was a very good place to get connected with a lot of Powelton people. Most of them very, very good people. But I think I wonder, because move was very much a very difficult part of everybody's experience in Powelton. For the most part, well, I can't even say that. There were some people who were very sympathetic with move, but I don't think they knew enough about move. I actually met Vincent Leapart, who was known as John Africa eventually. And he used to go through the neighborhood selling meat for dogs, dog food. I don't know where he got the meat, but people would buy meat for their dogs from him. And I once walked across the Spring Garden Bridge with him, just coincidentally, and he was walking a dog and I was going to the museum or something. And he told me that most people didn't know how to take care of dogs, and that 2 or 3 of the dogs he'd cared for that summer had died because of poor nutrition in their lives. He was a very strange person indeed. But so my husband and I got divorced, and not just to follow the trend, but it had been an early marriage, but just we weren't compatible, as it turned out, but not long-term compatibility. But so I was living there alone in the house, as I say, and I started playing the recorder. They needed someone to fill in on a recorder thing, and I played the recorder. And a woman who taught English at Friends Central School called me up and asked if I could come over. She lived in the neighborhood also. She asked me to fill in a recorder group, so I did. And she and her husband got divorced, and she moved to New York. So eventually I actually got the very same job that she had at Friends Central. Friends Central. I get them confused. At Friends Central, which is out on City Avenue. And we continued to play the recorder together and walk his dog and so on. That's how we met each other. Gradually, I got to know quite a few people in Powelton Village. I became very friendly with Betty Nemeth, who lived up Hamilton Street with her kids. And I believe that this happened to both Andy, her husband, and to Larry, and you might know about that, that someone came to the door with a gun. One of them actually got shot, but not fatally, obviously, and not, I think, maybe hit in the toe or something, but something like that. But that was at a time when things were, the 80s were a very bad time in Powelton. We'd had the move thing, but also drugs were just very big in Powelton. I mean, not in the city. There was a lot, pretty much a drug crisis, but there was a lot of street crime in Powelton in the 80s. And I guess we got robbed twice. I don't know if that's street crime, but it got discouraging. So mostly the way you got into Powelton is either to get very active in the Powelton Homeowners Association or to have kids that played with all the other kids. And then you got to know the parents. But these people I didn't know. But, move was very difficult. Betty Tilley, Betty Nemeth was no longer Betty Nemeth. She had married Peter Tilley. She had a baby right during the move thing. And I took Anthony, who was a few months older, over to 6 months, he was over to see her. They had policemen at every corner. And the first policeman I met was right next door to me, and he was saying, "That's a pretty nice neighborhood. Actually, it could be a pretty nice neighborhood. If I had a house here, I would do Well, I'd put up a great big fence all around it first, he said. I mean, it was a very strange encounter with a policeman, but he thought that if we all had great big fences around our houses, we would be in a good neighborhood. And then I got across the street when I got over to 34th and Baring, and there was a cop stationed there whom I had to be approved by before I could go to see Betty, who lived 2 houses down that block. And when I came out, I was carrying Anthony, and it was a warm day, and the cop told me to get that child home and put some shoes on him. And I thought it was a very odd thing. I said, he doesn't walk, and well, he shouldn't be out here in this weather without shoes and socks and gloves. And I said, well, it was very odd. I said, I didn't see you wearing them, and it is May, but, it was a rather odd encounter with a policeman. Across the street, we had Jim Dill and Jim Searle, the Jims, as we were called. And did you ever know them? Yeah, right. And Jim Dill had been the founder of Gay AA in Philadelphia. And so Gay AA met downtown, but he could cook. Oh, he was such a good cook. Made wonderful pastries and things like that. And he also did lots of he put in a new kitchen for us and did beautiful work. Really a very talented person with a kind of interesting life story. Maybe he's still around, I think. I mean, he moved into town, but and he did both my son's weddings and was just super. I got mad at Jim once because I made a beautiful, wonderful lime meringue pie, and he'd had some of it for dinner, and he asked me if he could have a piece to take home, and I said yes. I gave him a piece to take home, and he came back the next day with a critique of all the things I could have done to make my lime pie better. Typical Jim. But yeah, he was very important in the neighborhood, really. Everybody got to know him, and he did work for a lot of people. And Big Jim, as we called the other Jim, unfortunately was very sick, and he died. We're not sure what was the matter with him, but it was somehow related to a job he had. But anyway, they were good neighbors. And then, but Roger Wing moved into Harry Safarbi's house. That's right. And Harry Safarbi and Ruth Safarbi lived across the street from us. And Harry was the head teacher at the Barnes Foundation. And he had actually known Dr. Barnes and was, handpicked by Barnes to be one of the instructors there. And he was an interesting guy, but he would sometimes give me a critique of my photographs, which was nice, usually. But he was very opposed to the move of the Barnes into town, and so he had stopped the Barnes move or something, signs that he wanted to post in our yards. But he was very upset by that. And then, anyway, after Harry died, and Ruth both died, then that's when Roger and Elaine, is it? Roger Wing moved in with his family. They were very pleasant neighbors. When the neighborhood kids played, they had two kids. And Roger sends me an email every year. He's missing it this year. I better remind him. But I once gave him a rose bush that I had that somehow didn't fit into my decor in the backyard, and he would send me a picture each year when it bloomed in his backyard. But put lots of sculpted things on his porch, and we would look at them and admire them. And it was not something that, I don't think it offended anybody. I don't know, maybe it did, but he had that bizarre woman living she didn't live next door, but she owned the house next door. And that was a horrible situation. I forget her name now, but she was a black woman, and she had a white husband, and they moved into that house that was attached to the Safarbis then. And they were friendly, and they went to New York together at one point, and they would have dinner together sometimes. Then she got divorced. I met her at a dinner party one time, and she seemed pleasant enough. But then she was a doctor. And then just strange things. She started, she just let the house, she moved out. She had some kind of job out towards Swarthmore, and she moved out there, and she just let the house fall apart, but she didn't want to sell it. She didn't maintain it. And, I probably have an album of pictures, because every time we would go to court about it, we'd need pictures to support the case, and she would be ordered to fix up her apartment, or her house, I should say. And the porch was crumbling and looking like it would fall off, and they told her she had to have that fixed. And what she did is hire a tow truck, and have it roped something around the columns of the porch and pull the porch off the house. That's how she solved that problem. But she was really a problem. And once somebody hid in the bushes between her house and the Camerons, and came out with a gun, and I forget which one of the kids who lived on the next block was, I don't know if he was even held up, but someone came out at him with a gun. And, finally she did sell the house, and I really don't know what's happened to it since then. I was going to ask Sabre Cameron, who would know. And I didn't know Bob Colwell, but he was very popular. But people called him the mayor of Hamilton Street, and he liked that a lot. Just a very genial and sensitive person. I didn't know him well, but Andrea Taylor, who lived in the neighborhood then and taught at Powell for a while, had a son the same age as my son, Anthony. And they lived in the building, and he was wonderful to them. He just was he looked out for people. And he often had a protege, usually a young African-American male, that he would find work for, or, get people to do. He would just help nurture them along. I didn't know any of them well, but at all. I didn't know them at all, in fact. But he was just a good, generous neighbor. And then he moved across the river. And I talked to him once, I guess, but I never saw him again. And I believe he has died. Yes. But people really liked him. One of the nice things that the Powelton Civic Association, PVCA, yes, started doing after they were no longer the homeowners. The homeowners were just always concerned about upkeep and, just making sure everybody was doing things right. But they also had a pie in the sky ambition to close 34th Street at Market Street, make it a dead end. But once the Civic Association renamed itself and started doing things that brought more of the community into its active workings, and had, the 4th of July party, which was always very nice. We all brought, we didn't all, but some of us baked pies and put them in the pie contest, and the balloon throws, and so they were just great. They really brought people together. And then the Christmas party, the holiday party, really got to be. Jim Dill did a lot of cooking for that. I forget, I did something for it. I once got. We were in the other church, I think, but once prepared a small group of kids to sing some Christmas song or something like that, and I would contribute a dessert. And so, I tried to be as much a part of it as I felt was appropriate, and. It just seems, those things seem very useful to me, and I think having meetings, and it's a much more open organization than it used to be, and I think it just more than the old one used to be, and I think it's great. I hope it thrives, and there was a babysitting co-op in Powelton. I just remembered that when I I first moved in. And that was another way of bringing families together with children of the same ages, and that was good. And we just helped out. Once, several kids in the neighborhood went to the Miquon school, out near here, actually. And that's where my son Josh went after I left Friends Central. He, of course, no longer had his free tuition there. So he went to Miquon also. And Bob Lee's kids went there. And there were a couple other kids from the neighborhood. Betty Tilley's kids went there, and mine. And then the school bus that took them there had a strike. And so I became the bus driver. Somebody had a van, and I drove it out to Miquon with a bunch of Powellton kids in it. And that lasted about a month. And it was an experience I wouldn't care to work on again. Kids can be a little rowdy, and but it was kind of fun to do too. And I'd never driven a station wagon before, so that was an experience, I guess. And but a lot of kids went to private schools, and then the people whose kids went to public schools were annoyed about that. There was a Powell school by the time I got there. And they had, in typical Powellton style, it was I think it was all women who really did the agitation for this. They had an idea of the philosophy they wanted this school. They wanted the open classroom. And I don't know quite what their notion of the open classroom was, but some of them had read about the open classroom. Happy Fernandez was very involved in this, and Janie Freeman. Janie Freeman, it's too bad she's not living here. She moved back down to where she came from in North Carolina, but after, long time after. But they really worked on it, and this open classroom was very important. And so they opened it up, and it had the option. Oh, well, actually, first they also started the children's school, which was over on Spring Garden Street in a house. And I don't know how they got around this, but it was sort of an annex to the Powell School, and kids up to fourth grade could go there if their parents so chose. And two teachers from Powell School over where it is were assigned to the children's school across Spring Garden Street, or no, on this side of Spring Garden, on the near side of Spring Garden Street. And that was I don't know much about it, so I won't say any more. But fortunately, it had we chose to have Anthony go to our son Anthony Westies and my son go to the regular Powell School, and when we got there, we had the choice of the open or the traditional classroom, and there were I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 classrooms. And we wanted, of course, the open classroom. All the Powellton parents said they wanted the open classroom. And most of the African-American parents said they wanted the traditional classroom. So that created a very clear divide between black and white. There were a few black students in the so-called open classroom. And the teachers were really good. The teachers on the other side were very traditional, and that's what parents apparently wanted. And of course, they tended to be lower income. And Powell was always open to kids from Mantua as long as there was room in the school. There's a certain limit of students can be in the school, but there were not that many kids in Powellton Village that they filled the school. So the black parents came in and put the black kids in the traditional classrooms, and so it bothered me a lot that they were still effectively segregated. And the teachers over here were black, mostly. Over here they were white on the other side of the hall. And I can't remember how that was ended, but it was ended, fortunately. So that was also a kind of thing in the neighborhood. Well, is your kid going to go to public school or is he going to go to private school? And that tended to be a bit of a breaking line. You know, some people wanted private schools and some wanted public schools. We certainly wanted public school, and as long as it was an option. It went to sixth grade to begin with, but then it got more kids, and so they had to drop one grade, send those sixth graders off somewhere else, and then finally it ended up at only going to fourth grade. So the kids had to struggle very hard to get accepted at Masterman School down on Spring Garden Street. That was for supposedly academically talented kids. And of course, all of our children qualified. And all the not all of them, but the core population there. Most of the kids did go to Masterman. The Powell School now has been demolished, they demolished University City High School, which some of us still suspect that was not for the reasons they gave. They said they found asbestos in it. But it was the newest high school in town. They may still have had asbestos in it, but they correct asbestos in other buildings. But that land suddenly became very valuable. So they built the new school. Have you visited it? I have not been inside it. But what happened to me chronologically is I got a job at Drexel, which was very, very handy because I could walk to work. And one day the babysitter was not available, and Anthony was just 3 months old at the most. So I took him to school with me. I drove down, had a little seat, plumped him on my desk in his little thing. He slept. I taught my class. And the chair of the department, an absolutely wonderful woman, Martha Montgomery, I mean, just wonderful, got a phone call from the father of one of the students in the class complaining that the English teacher had brought a baby to school with her. And so Martha said, well, what did the baby do? And he slept. And she said, I think you're really lucky. Your son's very lucky to have such a role model of a woman who could be a professional woman and a parent at the same time. So he didn't call back, but and Tony never had to sleep on my desk again. But it was very nice to me because I also felt like here I am right in Powelton Village, and I'm, the Drexel students come here, and it coalesced nicely. I liked teaching at Drexel. I understand that Powelton Village has just recently been designated as a historic neighborhood, which it probably deserves. I mean, architecturally and maybe socially. I never got excited about it. It was not my cause. And I suppose maybe it increases property values. I don't know if it does. I don't know what they do with something that's designated historic, but I presume there's. I know that it's called Powelton Village because the mayor of Philadelphia was Samuel Powell, for whom the school is named, and he had a farm there on 33rd Street, and it's now a fraternity, I believe, and he responded to the smallpox epidemic by going back down to Center City, to his home, and catching smallpox and dying, which is very sad. But I would hate to see Powelton demolished, and I believe that having historic designation would prevent demolition of the neighbor serious demolition in the neighborhood. So that's all to the good, and lots of the houses have been beautifully renovated. And if people can afford that, that's great. I have to say that the house that I moved to Cathedral Village from cost I think it was $18,000 in the 1960s. And I sold I sold it for an absolutely indecent amount of money, which enabled me to move to this rather expensive place. And I don't know what that will. I wasn't happy. I had people who wanted to buy it, and who had families, and I would rather have sold it to them. But that's couldn't do that. But and it's all been fixed up now. I've been invited inside to see how it looks. And I'm shocked at having my old house look so different. But yeah, I think it's probably a very good idea to preserve neighborhoods like that. No, renovation is much more appropriate for. I mean, just yeah. No, I'm glad that it happened, and I guess it will preserve my old house, or my old houses. Yeah, some of them deserve more restoration than others, but yeah, it's nice, and it's got yards, it's got backyards and front yards, and gardens and all that. So I certainly like it a lot better. When I was going to move, I mean, I knew I shouldn't just stay there in that big house. Just me. I did rent a small apartment on the 3rd floor, but I didn't report it properly. But it's okay. I got it all straightened out with city. But that would be nice. It depends. Maybe I would. I miss the parties in Powellton, the 4th of July and the Christmas. And got down there recently just for a wedding, and it was just delightful to be there. And I also miss Art the mailman. I wonder if he's still there. I wonder if Art still comes around. He drives a package truck now, and he was, what a good man. He brought something in once. My grandchildren had just arrived for Christmas, and Art looked at the Christmas tree. He said, "No candy canes on that tree," and 10 minutes later, he was back with candy canes for the tree. And he was Sue Minnis, who, along with her husband Jack Minnis, were very active, very, very active in the neighborhood way back when it was really a new neighborhood. I mean, a new idea of a neighborhood. And after Jack died, Sue declined into a kind of dementia. And Art would always check on her when he came. And then he called one day and told me just to get over there. We had to get her to the hospital. And he's the mailman, but he's not just going to go deliver mail if there's somebody there who is definitely in need of going to the hospital. So yeah, I would see him when I would go in to. I used to go to Presbyterian for appointments and things, or I'd go visit someone. And every time, often I would see Art, and he'd park his truck and jump out and hug me, and we would catch up. And when I went out and took pictures of his baby, they had their new baby. It's very funny. On the street that Art lives on, his house is the only one that doesn't have the number on the door at the door. But. Yeah, I miss Art. He's a dear. He's a really dear person. So, and there was a guy up at the library. Now I forget what his name is, and he's probably not there anymore anyway. But and a nice woman who worked at the library, and I used to like to go up there. And I mean, I was getting books or taking books back, but I would always hang out and talk with them because they were so nice, so pleasant. And one of them was also a musician of some sort. I remember that Eli Anderson, he was living in Powellton when he published his book, the title of which I can no longer remember, but it was about, Streetwise. Yeah. And well, I hope Eli is not going to hear this, but he had some funny observations about people. If you believe his book, that the white people in Powellton were constantly giving cocktail parties. And I never went to a cocktail party. I never held a cocktail party. But they were a funny breed, the people with their cocktail parties. And he describes how intimidated people seemed when they met. Well, when a black person was coming in the street and a white person going up the street. And usually the street I would be going up would be 34th Street. But I never felt that. And I thought, this is kind of misrepresenting at least how I feel. I mean, one of the reasons I live here is that I love having the racial mix. And but he talked about the posture that people adopted and all that, you know. But it was odd. I worked with Eli on, I would proofread and do a little, make some suggestions and so on. And Elijah Anderson, Professor Elijah Anderson. Now he's at Yale now, and actually, he came down here and spoke before I moved in, but they turned to me because I had his address and got him down here, and he spoke, and people came out to hear him. He's doing very well, and he's off at Yale. Yeah, I think things changed somewhat. Well, I don't know if you remember, but shortly before I moved out of Powelton, not knowing that I was going to be moving out of Powelton, I suggested that we start a what do they call them now? There are lots of them. Well, we called it the Aging Together, the Powelton Mantua Aging Together Committee or something like that. And we started that and had some really good programs up at the corner, where the, Drexel, I guess, owns it now, but where it was an old school for the deaf or whatever, at the corner of Spring Garden. Nornside, yes, at Nornside, yeah. And we had some very good programs, and they did bring white people and black people together somewhat. The best one, I think the most effective one we had was, and I didn't even know this group existed, but there's a group of lawyers who on like Tuesdays, once a month or something, you can go and take any kind of problem you've got to them, and they'll help you with it. And the thing that we were concerned about was there's a lot of attempt to take homes away from people who don't understand the owner of the. If you have families live multi-generationally in Mantua very often, so when the oldest person dies, the next person becomes the owner of the house, and so on. They just pass it on, and they assume that covers it, but it doesn't, and you can lose the house. So that they have these lawyers come in and talk to people, and we got a huge turnout for that, and about the importance of making a will and the importance of getting all the legal papers around your residence. If you own the residence, who is to inherit it, and I don't know all the legal repercussions of that, but that was our most popular program, and deservedly so. But it was looking like a pretty nice organization. But then COVID, of course, just and I was sorry to leave that. And I came in at first before COVID hit. I came in for some meetings and events. And that was a nice way of getting to know some very nice people in Mantua as well. When I first moved to Powelton, and this is a nice memory because I didn't know anything about the place, and there was this young man. He had red hair and a dog, a poodle, a big standard poodle. He was walking it down 34th Street, and we had just looked at a house on 34th Street. And so I accosted this young man, and I asked him about the neighborhood, and he spoke very enthusiastically of the neighborhood. He liked it a lot, and that it was handy. He was a student at Penn at the time, and though he wasn't going there at that time, not with the poodle. And he had an incredible life story, which I won't go into now, but it certainly was. But he had, basically, his mother had married or bred with a German guy, and Gunther was born during the war and was left in Germany when she came to the United States, and was found, I think, by the Red Cross when he was about 10. And they put him on a boat by himself and sent him to Philadelphia. And that's where he ended up, and he met this mother. But he went to school. There wasn't a school for him to go to at all. when he came. So he went to school pretty far to the west. Don't know the name of the school. But he was a student at Penn at the time when I met him, and he was a photographer. And he just was a delightful young man. He came and he took some nice pictures of my son Josh and me to give our family for Christmas, I think. And but I've always kept it, well, until recently, I'd always kept in Gunther because he did go away and went, I guess he studied at RIT, I think, didn't he? And he then he taught there. But he would come back to visit Larry Byond. He lived in Larry's house for a long time. And he had a room in Larry's house. So I would see him every time he came back to Larry's house. He and I would get together and have a meal or just talk or whatever. But very, very nice guy. Well, I do know other exciting stories about Gunther too, but yeah, the last time I saw him, I think, was at a Christmas party, maybe.
Did you know much about Josh Markell and his little kind of cooperative going?
Oh, Josh, yeah. Let's see. And there were people in the neighborhood. Josh Markell, a very good example of someone who, let's see, when would that have, what was it? Oh, he was a very engaged anti-war peace activist. Now, I'm trying to think. That was when I was new in the neighborhood, so I didn't know him then. But why was it? There was something that people put sirens on. They made co-ops in Powelton. There's Job Chillaway House on Baring Street, and then the corner house on 34th and Baring also was a what did they call them? Anyway, they had a siren on top, and the siren was to be blown. I can't remember why. It was not when the
FBI.
When the FBI was pursuing, I guess it was, okay. The FBI was quite sure that someone in Powelton Village had been the one to steal do the break-in for the, out in media. But they broke into the, CIA, no, not FBI, I can't remember, the office out in media that had all kinds of records that, boy, I just can't remember what the media files. I mean, there's a whole book about it. Don't remember what the media files were about, but they had something to do with war, with the army or
the draft board.
The draft, I think maybe.
It was the draft board.
COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO.
COINTEL, draft, stuff like that. And so the assumption was immediate. This tells you what Powelton's reputation was. Well, obviously, anybody who'd go and break into the media draft place is obviously from Powelton Village. So they thought. It happened not to be true. But we had the FBI, of course, swarming around Powelton, and people taking pictures of FBI agents and putting them, making posters and putting them on the phone poles saying, "Have you seen this man," or something, "Watch out for this guy." The FBI was, and of course they had to dress the way J. Edgar Hoover wanted them to, so you could spot them instantly, because nobody in Powelton Village ever dressed that way. But Josh Markell was one of the people Josh and Eva, and they had a communal house. They were there, and Judy Buchanan and Jim Parker, but Fred Jakes and his wife lived in the house, and they all had, Judy and Jim didn't have kids, but Fred and, oh gosh, I've forgotten Fred's wife's name. Hope she never sees this. But then one night, someone came bang, bang, banging at my door on 34th Street. We were inside making doing some stuff, getting ready for the mayoral election. Rizzo was running against somebody, I don't know, but anyway, bang, bang, bang. The FBI has just broken into so and so. So we all went out, and they'd broken into, or they had, I guess they may have broken into somewhere else. They had taken the typewriter from someone's apartment over on the next street over, Spring Garden Street, the 3300 block of Spring Garden Street. And it just went on. They just kept assuming that someone in Powelton had done it. So they just peopled the streets, and especially when there was used to be some sort of a party, street party in the summer near the Menace's house over there on 37th. And they would be watching. But it turned out, of course, that it was not anyone from Powelton Village, although I think there were a couple people in Powelton who knew about the Haverford professor who was involved in that. But, of course, they weren't going to tell anyone. And then the cooperative houses kind of flourished for a while. The Powelton Piles, as they were called, they're across the street, across Spring Garden Street from the school. And they were not in very good condition, and they eventually got all completely refurbished. And I guess there was a little grocery store in the bottom of the one farthest to the west, that side, and Ira Einhorn lived there. And he, of course, is infamous. And that was a horrible time, too, when his girlfriend disappeared. Holly, yeah. She was it was hard to understand why she was with Ira Einhorn, but she was. She worked at the food co-op, and the food co-op got started while I was there too. And that was in the former drugstore at the corner of 36th and Pearl, I believe. Okay. And at first, I went on a couple of the food runs. My husband and I guess that was Wesley at the time. No, Wesley and I went down and picked up the food for the co-op. Was it called the food co-op? Anyway, it was a store that got food from the food distribution center and brought it to the old corner drugstore and sold it. It was very handy to be able to get vegetables and I think cheese and stuff like that one could go over there and get. And Holly worked there sometimes. And it was really bizarre when she disappeared because she was a lovely, very pretty young woman. I think she lived at Job Chillaway House at first before she moved in with Ira Einhorn. And where Drexel now has a parking lot on 35th Street. It used to be a big open field, and we played volleyball there a lot in the evenings. I wonder, were you there when we played volleyball? You probably weren't. It was great. People assembled to play volleyball. And in the winter, we played in the CEC. And then we ran our dogs a lot over there in that lot. And finally, when Holly's parents hired private detectives, because they, of course they couldn't, they needed to know where Holly was. And it's a horrible story, but the detectives noticed that dogs used to hang out under the bay window in Ira Einhorn's apartment on the second floor. And that indeed was where he had put Holly's body in a trunk. He'd had a big closet built or something too. I mean, it was all really someone who could have seen everything in order would have known at once what was going on, but they didn't see it. So Holly was in the closet for who knew how long. But that was just a horrifying, horrifying story. Right, yes, that was it. That story broke the same day, 3 Mile Island blew up. And Ira only got a little bit down the bottom of the page. But a lot of the people, a lot of women who had young babies in Powelton, no, not a lot, but several actually went to Florida and stayed there until the 3 Mile Island thing was cleaned up, and we were assured. I didn't go there, but actually we were just about to leave for England for a year, so we didn't need to go to 3 Mile Island. I mean to Florida. But then there's in front of the Community Education Center, which used to be a Friends Quakers, that is, school. There are 2 trees, a holly and then I forget the other, but one of them was supposed to represent holly and one of them is supposed to represent Ira, and the one that's Ira is closed, or maybe they've cut it down by now. But so it was said that was the reason for planting those trees there.